Okay, welcome everybody. We have a very interesting group of papers here under the title Humanity, Image, Art, and the End of Time and Space. These guys are going to have to deal with the end of time and space because this gets me very nervous. But as we said, Martin Spear will be here, but we have Ian Chung from Columbia College talking about media, Kerigma and Norbert Frey. Is that Norbert Frey?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, pays to rehearse, right? Lauren Trujillo from the University of Pan America, the campus in Mexico, talking about the humanity of technology, something that we're in great need of these days. And I'm going to be talking about the first title. My title was too long. I need to shorten these things in the interest of efficient communication. Reforming the image and imagining the word about the development of modern propaganda. So, let me start with the board. The humanity of technology.
Yes, thank you very much. I made a little change in the title, so it's Humanity and Technology. Human life has developed through media and reality, technology and nature. There are a lot of myths to show this profound relation from the beginning of human life. Our understanding of the world and ourselves depends on the media, directly or indirectly. In the ancient Greek, the relations with the gods were, in Hegel's words, harmonious, because men and gods could communicate without problems. In fact, the better the relationship was, the better tools the gods let humankind use. For example, Hephaestus in war used to provide Greek army with the best weapons. Athena will help them with battle strategies, and we cannot forget Prometheus' myth and his greatest gift to men, the fire. We can see this relationship as a fantastic story, but it describes the reality about men and nature. It looks like media is a condition for men to act in the world, but is the necessity we have for media real? Or is just the case we have to use them, which lead us to interact with them? Through this paper, I will show the different stages men have had in his relation with technology and the consequences for the man essence. In the book, The Fourth Revolution, How the Infosphere is Reshaping Human Reality, Luciano Floridi explains the different stages of the human-nature relationship through history in a philosophical way. I will take this theory as a base to analyze the effects of this relationship in the human essence with the media ecology theory. So, in the first place, Floridi distinguishes two different changes in each revolution. The first one is about the world itself. Through the years, science has explained the world in multiple ways. Such an understanding also lets us perceive reality in diverse senses. This approach may be seen as external to the men, because such theories are created by science that meant to be objective. The second one is about how we understand what we see or what we hear, because the way what we see reality affects our comprehension of ourselves and the world. In fact, some philosophers, like Socrates, talked about the necessity for men to know themselves, and this has to be only through the outside world. Also, this relationship between the outside world and the human being has been brought up by the media ecology as something essential for man, because he is doing himself through the relations he has with the media and the world. So, in accordance to Floridi, if we change our understanding of the world, the perceptions we have from it, we also modify the conception of who we are. Everything goes from the external world we call reality to the internal world we call mind. For media ecology, on the contrary, the society, the world, is our product. So everything goes from the internal world to the external world. That is why Father John Hopkins and Marshall McLuhan agree in the idea, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Because in some way, we are doing us through the tools, the media, the technology we create. So, the first revolution in accordance to Floridi was with Nicholas Copernicus in the 16th century. He claimed the planets move around the sun, contrary to the past beliefs about the Earth as the center of the universe. This affirmation makes people to think about their position in the universe, because before Copernicus, everybody thought the Earth was the center. So were the people. Historically, this discovery marked the general thought of the people of the Renaissance, because science showed them the minor value they had in their position, as well the position of the Earth in front to other planets. We were no longer the center of the universe, but at least we have something else. We are humans, the highest and smart creature in Earth, thanks to reason. Then, after this first revolution, humanity lost their faith in the external world and believed in their intelligence. Also, in this age, Descartes spoke about the importance of our mind to know the world and the primacy of it in front of the world. The famous phrase, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, original from St. Augustine, but famous with Descartes, expressed the importance of the mind versus the world. With this theory, it happened what was called the Copernican revolution in philosophy, because then the center of everything was the human mind. The second revolution was with Charles Darwin in the 19th century, with the publication of his On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Here, Darwin showed how the different life species had evolved through time to become a new species. Of course, this study showed the fragility of men. After this revolution, there are a lot of questions to make, as where do we come from? Where do we go? Who are we really? In this stage, we were no longer the center of the species. Man was only an evolved species. This idea changed the way we saw humanity, because we were no more an advanced animal naturally, but we are only an evolution species. Although not everybody has accepted this theory until now, many people have changed the way to see themselves, because it looks like everyone in the origin are the same. Animals are live beings, and nature is in charge to define the form or essence of each being in accordance to their adaptation to the world. It is also interesting to look back to the theories that emerged in this age. One of them was the feminism, the idea that women should be allowed the same rights, power, and opportunities as men, and be treated in the same way, or the set of activities intended to achieve this state. Also, the existentialism with Søren Kierkegaard, who claims the importance of the subject in himself, his life, his individual actions. In fact, Kierkegaard criticized the universal theories versus the study for each human being, because we were not a whole, but an individual life with specific necessities. All of these theories give us an idea about the affection in man, because this second revolution, and the importance of our thinking in front of our nature, because the reflection, the possibility to generate new ideas, became the most important thing in this age. The third revolution became with Sigmund Freud in the 20th century. For him, men have an unconscious and unconscious mind. We regularly repress feelings and thoughts, so sometimes we think we are something we are not. We also found in him some ideas of Schopenhauer and mainly Nietzsche about the glorification of the vital thing against the rational, the concepts of libido and sublimation, etc. Thereafter, in accordance to Freud, the proper future of man is not the rational, but the irrational. His definitive being is in darkness and the unconsciousness. His true nature consists on that deep substrate unattainable for the reason. And that nature does not ascend to its total accomplishment through the elevation of the rational plane. The reason is, in fact, the consequence to have done violence to or to have repressed the natural instinct. The perfection consists on maintaining the natural thing that Freud identifies with instinctive and the unconscious, the irrational. The reflective reason does not dominate the nature, but distorts and corrupts it. So, as we can see, after this third revolution, the mind, the rationality, is not as good as we thought, because it seems that to be irrational or more animal is better than acting rationally. Then, where is the right position for the human being now? We have some choices to make. Be irrational animals and let our instincts to act, and maybe we will be more humans, or act rationally to put limits in our instincts, and then we will be less human. Nevertheless, we have thoughts, and this is a special condition of men, and we are the only being capable of reasoning. Maybe this function, it is not clear for us, but at least we are the only animals which can have smart thinking. Then the fourth revolution came, the arriving of the computer, which can make intelligent statements as a human, and it can liberate us from some intellectual work. And with this, we have been forced to abandon once again a position that we thought was unique. In this case, what are we now? Which is our special condition that makes us better than other beings in the world? After the fourth revolution, it looks like our place in the world is to be informational organisms which are connected each other, consuming and producing information. Our value has to be with our place in the internet. If we are not in the net, therefore we do not exist. I tweet, therefore I am. We like to share everything. As social beings, we tend to be part of communities, and now they are not necessarily physical, but virtual. This is putting us aside because we are making us more dependent of the media for any activity we do. It is impressive how many times we use our media. A recent study by Deloitte found people in the United States check his smartphone 46 times per day in average. That number varies depending on users' age group. Those between the age of 18 to 24 look at their phones more often, with an average of 74 checks per day. Americans in the 25-34 age bracket look at their devices 50 times per day, and those between 35 and 44 do so 35 times each day. What does it mean? Our media now are more part of our nature. We are in a media ecology era where the media are exceeding human beings. As we can see, men have had some relation with their media, and this has made some changes in the human being. For some people, men through the years have become more intelligent. For others, people today is happier, productive, etc. And all of these qualifiers have to do with the relation between man and his media. The four revolutions show us the advance of the mind in man, the technological advances, but not precisely a better human being. Most of all, we can see through time the wish of the human to dominate the world. Indeed, he has succeeded, but he has forgotten himself. Instead, we have created new tools which condition us, and in McLuhan's work, determine a lot of our actions. The four revolutions also show us how we actually depend on media. Every day we need our tools for simple activities, such as remember dates, telephone numbers, to drive, to rest, etc. Technology is now part of the human being. We cannot be without it. In fact, we are losing ourselves to let media take our place. If we are only data and intelligent processes, we are nothing else but some alive robots, which have failures, emotions, get tired, etc. The new humanity in our world is the robotic technology. Today, there are a lot of projects to perform implants for a better vision, hearing, to take videos automatically, photos, etc. Now, we are losing our essence to become more technological, more perfect, and less imperfect, less human. As a conclusion, I have to say that as human beings, we have the necessity to develop in a society, to create better conditions for our life, to become better human beings. But this task has been so difficult because we have not been able to distinguish what is better or worse. Our intelligence fails us, or we fail to our intelligence. We are trying to make a world with better conditions, with more accurate tools, and at the same time, we are losing ourselves because we underestimate our imperfect nature to pursue technology's perfection. This is a call to take care about what we are doing with our tools and what they are doing with us. The purpose of a media ecologist is to warn people about the media and their effects in human nature. Because remember, the medium is the message, and it shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and works. As McLuhan said, media shape our consciousness and experience. We are building ourselves through the media. We use and we are losing our capacities when we use an extension. We have to take care about the world we live in because we are transforming our nature to a more technological humanity. Thanks a lot.
Eric has a first name.
Norbert was also.
Yes, probably. Yeah. So it's thanks. Here and a little handout that's got bibliography. I didn't draw pictures, so I urge you to do that. You have lots of opportunity, and I'm giving you paper. So
Pull off the page, right?
if you guys are interested, there's bibliography and a little observation about what the poets say.
As opposed to what the fox said.
Sorry, I missed it.
Said as opposed to what the fox said.
Yes, can't do that one. So this paper has an odd word in it, kerygma, and I'm just going to start with a quick definition from Wikipedia, but it's from the theologian Bultmann, and it's a proclamation not addressed to theoretical reason, but to the hearer as a self. Okay, so that's just background. And I'm going to give you a little background about Northrop Frye. I think some of you are familiar with his name, but he was a colleague of Harold Innis and Marshall McLuhan at U of T. He was in English, he taught English at Victoria College. Some of us were in Northrop Frye Hall last year. But he also helped out in the 1960s as a commissioner on Canada's broadcast regulator, the CRTC, and that got him assessing Innis's history of communication and also involved in an ongoing evaluation of Canadian media and society, and so I think the relationship between media and society in general. But really he is best known as a literary critic, and he had this profound understanding of the power of the word. He was also an ordained minister, and so it's frequently easy to read his criticism as a kind of spiritual guidance. Robert Denham is an emeritus prof from University of Virginia, and he has followed Fry and explicated Fry for a generation and more now, edited the collected works, and I'm leaning a lot on some of Denham's work here, and Denham is leaning on Fry, so hopefully you'll get some of that stuff. But Denham, put out a book from University of Ottawa Press a couple of years ago called Northrop Frye and Others, 12 writers who helped shape his thinking. And he makes connections between Fry and Joachim Flores and Giordano Bruno and Kierkegaard and others. So I'm going to be trying to explicate a bit of that. Coming up with the myth of concern. So the questions at the end are around what we do with our technology as well. Last year at the business meeting, Ed said that when we came here, it would be all taken care of. And what I heard in my mind was, the West is the best. The West is the best. Get here and we'll do the rest. You know it, right? Yeah. And then I heard the blue box is calling us. The blue box is calling us. And does anybody know what fall is actually? Yeah. Driver, where are you taking us? Okay. So it's the Doors. From The End, the song The End, and weird scenes inside the gold mine, a kind of dystopian vision. But my thought was, and this is just helped me out here, the media are boosting our powers of what we think is important, maybe. And this is kind of a Frankfurt School culture industry critique as well, right? Like, why does Ian's brain go to an old Doors lyric when Ed says we're going to Morocco? So that's a question, right? What are the texts? And we are the texts that we identify with the text. That's going to be a point that Fry makes. So that was one thing. And I'd like you just as, you heard me talking about the Doors, so think about it for yourself. A poem or a song or a book that changed your mind, that maybe revolutionized your consciousness. That's something to think about. And that's what we're talking about with this idea of charisma being a kind of proclamation that speaks to you as a self, okay? Revolutionizing your consciousness, maybe that's blowing your mind one way or another. So I guess actually I threw up some non-graphic graphics here, and I'm going to supplement those. I will get to these things, but the first thing I should do, this is in the context of thinking about Fry as somebody who was good with schemas, like he saw patterns, right? And some people accuse him of, oh, you're so structural, but it's useful, and the connections are real across time. He read everything and was a great reader, so 20th century man who read. What are the orders of words? So Lepidoptera is an order of animal and that kind of thing. What are the orders of words? One is narrative, and I'm going to just abbreviate things here. One is rhetoric, and another one is going to be mythological, and then his last one is where charisma comes. Ooh, look at me! The magic of the screen. And this part, the narrative, this is our conceptual thinking. So Descartes' cogito, right? Nonsense here. And this, the rhetorical part, is moral persuasion. This is advertising. This is propaganda. And part of it is persuasion, but part of it is decoration, right? The ornamentation of language and the sequencing, so ornament, okay? And then this is where story is. So this seems to be where we are a lot of the time, advertising, propaganda. We take stories and we take ideas and we put them together in a way that people want to follow. What the heck is this? This thing that is beyond the poetic. This is actually the poetic order of words. And so he's suggesting this is a kind of prophetic utterance. What's going on in your head right now? Maybe. And meta-literary. Okay, I'm pausing because I was realizing there's a line in here about the Bible being it's a literary text. There are literary aspects to it, but it's something more than that. That's what's happening over here, kerygma. And ideally, it will extend your vision and potentially take you to a level of ecstatic perception. These ones, this is ideology. And this stuff supports the anxieties that we feel, this order of words that we live in all the time. What I'm doing right now supports our social anxieties and social authority. And so somebody in the room is asking, okay, Northrop, what's beyond kerygma? So,
They want a lot for their money, right?
yeah, well, and there is a funny suggestion in the notebooks that, and maybe I should try to write it down. So it's the world of words as seen by the word. So beyond kerygma, the world of words as seen by the word, with a capital W. Okay. And so break on through to the other side. I am, as I say, following Denham, and he has an excellent book in the list there called Northrop Frye Unbuttoned, and it is just a great little dictionary of thoughts that he's pulled out of the notebooks. So here's kerygma. This is Frye on kerygma. It's a spiritual rhetoric delivered from ideology by being on the other side of myth. The Gospels contain the teachings and parables of Jesus. They're logocentric, but they come to us in continuous, to some extent, written form. Like I say, he's a reader. So continuous written form. The kerygma is, and I use this term advisedly, the resurrection of the living speaker from the written myth. Or, he says, rather the living word. And it was interesting to see Neil Postman resurrected for us on Thursday, right? That's using the media to resurrect. Just a little connection there. He goes on in a different passage that there's a famous passage in William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience about coming out of nitrous oxide and being aware of parallel worlds, right? And those parallel worlds are some so close as to be almost recognizable or entirely recognizable. And so Frye is making a connection to the world of Julian Jaynes' hallucination, the hallucinating word across the bicameral mind. A world where God speaks. That's where the kerygmatic voice comes from. A hell of a good universe next door. And actually, he goes thinking about that. He is listening, and that's how he writes. He talks a bit about his writing process, I think in chords or aphorisms, as these notebooks indicate. And all the labor in my writing comes from trying to find verbal formulas to connect them. I have to wait for the chords to emerge. They seem to be born, not made. In one of the notebooks for the Anatomy of Criticism, he speaks of these aphorisms as auditory epiphanies. They are, he says, involuntarily acquired and have something to do with a listening for the word, the ear being the involuntary sense. And he complained about radio, and he was a young man when radio really started to hit, as the subtlest attack on human peace of mind yet invented. So interfering with my hearing. Anyway, let me talk a bit about a couple of these influences. Joachim of Florus, biblical exegete. He was an Italian abbot from the 1100s, a mystic, a philosopher of history. And his three chief works, a book of concordance, the exposition of the book of Revelation, and the Psaltery of the 10 Strings. So Denham looks and finds a dozen parallels between Florus and Frye, one of which is they're both on a spiritual pilgrimage in pursuit of an object of desire. For Frye, it was the work of Blake. He used the work of Blake, and he, as this is Denham, seeks with unremitting energy the verbal formulations that will carry him to a double vision lying beyond the poetic. So seeing this world both as the object and as something of immanence. Both were, another connection, primarily exegetes interested in finding the meaning of texts. So Frye asks a big question. He realized one of his big questions is, how do we arrive at poetic meaning? So here's the poetic, and it's going to be something to do with the decorative use of language and something to do with this proclamation from beyond. Right? How do we arrive at poetic meaning? And his other big question was, what is the total subject of study of which criticism forms a part? Which is kind of interesting. You know, that's what he was pursuing. So Both of them also interested in something of an everlasting gospel, so that's what would be revealed when you really break on through. And actually, I have to read this little bit. I'm going to skip the stuff from the book of Revelation, but he's talking about verse 17 in Revelation and says, the suggestion seems to be that the Bible reaches in its closing words not an end, but a beginning. And that beginning is in the mind of the reader. So that the apocalypse in its turn becomes a type. In that case, what is its antitype? What's it going to produce by being pressed? And there's only one thing, he says, it can possibly be, and that is where we started, with a new creation. It goes on. That's how Paul describes describes the gospel in Romans and elsewhere. So, an everlasting gospel. I jotted this up because one of the connections that Denham makes is that Fry thinks schematically, so I'm sorry it's a mess, but Joachim, as a historian, has the age of the Father, Son, Spirit. So the age of the Father, the age of the Son, the age of the Spirit, the language level, hieroglyphic, hieratic, demotic, conceptual form, mythological, theological, political, psychological. This is where we are. Vico's ages, gods, heroes, and men. There's always a demonic parody in Fry, so the totalitarian states, Jung's terrible mother, the demonic bride, and it goes on. Historical stage, this is biblical and classical. This is St. Thomas to Hegel, and then this is Marx and Freud and Nietzsche, etc. Okay, Rousseau, yeah. So one really interesting thing about the visuals is that he apparently is quite well known for taking the tetragrammaton, so what is it? It's Yod, He, Vav, He, and making it into a set of circles that interact. And what color are the circles, friends? They are red, blue, and green. Why not? It's your screen. Okay, so that's Joachim of Flores. Let's leave him and talk about Bruno for a second. So the big idea that Fry gets from Giordano Bruno, who is described by Denham, this is the best, 16th century Dominican friar, philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, he goes on, and madcap freethinker. And that's, wouldn't that be a great epitaph? Who was burned at the stake in 1600 for his heretical theological views. But the big deal is that he was interested in this notion of interpenetration. So if we're interested in the notion of metaphor being a kind of statement of identity, this is that, what's most interesting for Fry is not that there's a kind of uniformity of it, but rather that there is a recognized dynamism. This is a force. This is something that each is penetrating into the other and changing it. And so the kinds of things that interpenetrate could be unity and variety, could be wholes and parts, totality, particularity, the divine and the human interpenetrating. So that's a useful idea. I had a thought yesterday listening to Aaron Zaks as he used the word hip-hop-sploitation, and I thought, oh, our portmanteau words are a kind of interpenetration, right? That there's some meaning that transfers from both sides of the word to illuminate. And Eric McLuhan actually on Thursday said something about the telephone allowing us to be here and then our voice to be over there, so we're in more than one place. So it made me think, we're all interpenetrating all the time now, and that's really the point that Fry is driving at. How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3?
Yeah.
Okay. I should try to wrap it up relatively quickly. Come back to Fry as somebody who's interested in helping us think about the world. He builds on some of Kierkegaard's ideas around concern, which is also in Heidegger, and the concerns he comes up with are the primary concerns and some secondary concerns. But before we get there, concern is a word that he picked up from the existentialists. It seems likely he first found them in Kierkegaard, and he's interested in the concerned truths over against the objective truths. So we're in a world. This world is a created world, and we can look at it and speculate about it, and its reality is there to begin with. But we are also humans who are making our world. And so that world, the world that we want to build out of the environment, depends on us, on our sense of our destiny, of our hopes, of our anxieties. And so effectively that is a reality that will be brought about by a certain kind of human act. Okay, so a fair amount about that. The primary concerns are food and drink, and sex, and property, and, forgive me, freedom of movement or play. So those are things that we genuinely care about. And I'm going to skip the schema, but talk a little bit about those concerns. So again, I'm just quoting from Denon, giving myself a tough time here. Wanted to draw the schema, and those two, back to interpenetration. The myths of concern, the stories we tell ourselves about that, and the myth of freedom, our sense of scientific observation and so on, they too interpenetrate. So concern and freedom, both occupy the whole of the same universe. They interpenetrate, and it's no good trying to set up boundary stones. But the growth of knowledge, so this is our world now where there's so much information, the growth of knowledge cannot in itself provide us with the social vision that would suggest what we should do with our knowledge. So that's where concern figures in. I think you know what, I'll just skip to a concluding remark. If we are at that point where our concern has been awakened, and this is something from Kierkegaard again, then in an ideal situation, we'll have the thought and we'll act on it, and it will be good action. Right? And I actually think Robert Logan is helping us out that way, because we talked the other day about nice yawn. We talked the other day about the questions of climate change and our need to be engaged and so on, and he went ahead and drafted something. So at the business meeting today, I think we will be considering that. So thought and action together. So this is Fry, back to Joachim of Flores. I've said that the monastic movement, at least that phase of it that ended with the great Benedictine period, was in a way Christian yoga. Joachim of Flores has a hint of an order of things in which the monastery takes over the church and the world. That is the expanded secular monastery I want. This is Fry. I want the grace of Castiglione and the grace of Luther. A graceful as well as a gracious God. And I want all men and women to enter the Abbey of Thelem, where instead of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they will find richness, love, and basic voudra, for what the Bodhisattva wills to do is good. Thanks.
No, for me to follow you to
Oh,
the paper after you did all that, I mean, that's, all right, well, we'll try to. Okay, my paper's calling Reforming the Image, after the book by Joseph Dale Kerner's Reforming the Image. I just managed to get through. Imagining the word, pedagogy, propaganda, and paradox of the Protestant art of the period. The study of modernity is tied to the means of achieving it, less a substantive artifact than a cognitive and rational activity. The symbolic tools used to act modern are keys to the mechanism of how this cultural sensibility finds itself and acts in the world. The media ecology tradition, as is well known, has examined the role of the printing press in the construction of modernity. Art historians have investigated how the artistic and intellectual style of mannerism has played a similar role both in the visual arts and elsewhere. As I've shown in my Explorations article, Mannerism in Modernity, a pictorial parallel to the print revolution. Print historian is Elizabeth Eisenstein, and art historian Arnold Holzer tell remarkably similar stories of their chosen medium's role in modernity's birth. In the article, I point out that whereas a print-based version of this account applies well to an emerging Protestant culture of popular literacy, painting, sculpture, and other visual media were used to similar ends in the Catholic South. As recent study of the political and other social origins of Michelangelo's David reveals, in 16th century Florence, images were being reshaped and retasked to suit the needs of nascent modern pedagogy and propaganda. Here at the very heart of the Renaissance itself, it can be seen how the transition from Renaissance to Mannerist styles both originates in and facilitates the activities and messages of the earliest modern institutions. Such coincidence of changes in symbolic representation and social organization give full expression to what Hauser refers to as the crisis of the Renaissance. My present study looks at a variation in the style of symbolic representation and in the style and context of social organization that coincided in such early modern evolution. The style is Northern Mannerist painting, here exemplified in the work of the German painter Lucas Cranach, and the context is that of the Protestant Reformation, here exemplified in the thought and practice of Martin Luther. The case of Northern Mannerist painting poses at once a reassurance and a challenge. The product of the failure of a single system of universal representation, Mannerism is characterized by the intentional distortion of naturalistic representation. The root of all that is expressionistic in modern art, it portrays multiple relativistic perspectives within the same work. That this crisis in representation was responded to in the same way beyond the borders of the Roman world suggests that these were not merely local phenomena. Northern Mannerist paintings share the same fundamental break with the Renaissance ideal with their Italian cousins. But on the other hand, Mannerism is a style which is hard to describe or recognize concretely because it is explicitly characterized by fragmentation and diversity. Though produced through the same epistemological mechanism, on the surface at least, Northern Mannerist painting looks completely different from the Italian variety. How then can we be sure that the specific elements found in Northern paintings perform the same functions in the German Protestant context as their Southern analogs did in Florence? Only a specific study of their uses can reduce this uncertainty. Luther and the Reformation are also both reassuring and challenging, inextricably linking a state of religious consciousness with a specific symbolic medium. Martin Luther can be considered to be a foundational media ecologist. Also for his decentering of the religious cosmos, or he has been described as a Mannerist thinker who has brought about an entire Copernican revolution in religion. And yet, Luther essentially believed that issues about symbolic interpretation were non-issues. His ideas about how the word or the world is represented have a ring of an alarming positivism. And though he is known for having located the image of Christ in the perspective of the individual believer, especially in his later thinking, that individual becomes the secular ruler, whose freely chosen beliefs become the commands of an absolutist state. And besides, weren't the Protestants against the use of images, other than as fuel for the iconoclastic flames? Of what use could painting be to Luther's movement? In light of these fundamental questions, it is remarkable to discover that Luther's closest friend and collaborator was a painter, Lucas Cranach. For a starter, each was the godfather of the other's children. More relevant to the connection between painting and Protestantism, Cranach can be said to have managed an entire image-based channel of Protestant propaganda, which was coordinated and which ran parallel to the Reformers' own words. This role that he played can most easily be seen and understood in his secular paintings. Freed from the centripetal pull of the Roman Church, Cranach depicted secular society, especially marriage and the emerging nuclear family, as the cradle of individual faith. His infamous portraits of women in particular, whether clad in the garb of their social station or nude, but for the embellishment of hat, gloves, jewelry, and such, show a model of the individual suited to perform traditional functions in a manner consonant with modern consciousness. Just gives you imagination. But it is in his explicitly religious painting, and most importantly, in altarpieces where Cranach's Mannerist style is called upon to perform the task of depicting an invisible God who is removed from the world and yet undeniably there. And a church which has no material embodiment and yet which exists invisibly in the social world of communication between believers. It is such ontological paradoxes that Mannerism is all about. Such paradox becomes more insistent when we consider the ambiguity or even contradiction in Luther's views about images. Though he asserts that the ears and not the eyes can lead us to Christ, He also claims that the soul is an image-making mechanism, this term. Even radical iconoclasts seemed at least unconsciously to embody this tendency, as they quite ironically subjected the very idols that they denounced as mere objects to the abject forms of torture experienced by Christ himself in the Passion. And some of the stories have done this are just hilarious. Even in its own erasure, the image reasserts itself. A complement to this in Lutheran painting, where in the course of being positively reasserted, the image erases itself. The simultaneous assertion and erasure of the image has been referred to as, I hate cliches, iconoclash. Okay. Although their aims and means, I disavow any connection. Although their aims and means often overlap in many complex ways in practice, the list of painterly techniques used to support Luther's movement can roughly be divided as having been devoted to one or the other of two basic ideological projects: the representation of that which has no material manifestation, and the transformation of religion into a model of methodically efficient communication. Although at first glance the second of these might seem aimed to eliminate the type of paradox expressed in Mannerist art, Luther's ideal of clear, unmediated transmission of the word stood in uneasy relation to the highly ambiguous, even mysterious content that it at least implicitly carried. In other words, the necessary cohabitation of clarity and mystery constitutes a sort of higher order meta-paradox, if you will, that required the utmost accommodation. Just how these painterly techniques accommodate the full range of paradoxes is complicated and paradoxical in itself. For now, let me just say that for the most part, my initial two hypotheses were confirmed by my research. Yes, Northern Mannerism does seem to do the same sorts of things that Italian Mannerism does, and yes, it does seem to apply them to issues in Protestantism that are similar to the ones taken up in the South during the same period. What strikes me, and what I think might seem most significant to you, who are probably more familiar with the print version of the story, is the anomaly that I encountered in the course of this research. It's an anomaly made all the more impressive by the extent of the means used to mask its betrayal, and by the blunting of artistic genius that was its revenge. In short, certain elements of Cranach's painting involve what can be described as the kind of visualism that Walter Rahm discusses as a feature of the early print environment in which Ramist method was developed, which is also related to Methodism and has a little religious line going through there. Although through critical analysis, one can see that these elements are subtly ambiguated in an environment that is more fully pictorial than the charts and diagrams of Ramist method, to be sure. On the surface, they display the same sort of reification and semantic flattening as the Parisian pseudo-philosophers' massive oversimplifications. What follows is a preliminary list of visualist traits that I found to be shared by Ramist method and Lutheran painting. The most glaring and bizarre connection that these paintings have with Ramist's 16th century flowcharts is in their use of words. Not only did painters like Cranach inscribe words over and amongst the images in their works, the practice of decorating and labeling spaces with words spread to the walls and other surfaces of churches, homes, and even personal artifacts. On the canvas, these words are depicted as a sort of objectified speech, which is opaque to interpretation and which represents nothing more than the fact of its having been enunciated. As objectified actions, they use to point to or otherwise connect with images, which also are used to embody the actions represented by and embodied in these very same enunciations. See where this is going? Through various sorts of linear visual connectors, word and image reciprocally denote one another, while their common object status limits their role to that of signifiers, which, like a hall of mirrors, really reflect other reflections ad infinitum, while the ultimate signified vanishes into an invisible beyond. as what Luther called true images, which indicate no more than self-evident facts. Both word and image are reduced to the functions of pointing and instructing, as in the biblically crucial indication, this is my body. In some ways, everything is as this is, or the objection, do this in memory of me. A pointing and an instruction. Okay? The kind of space in which this display of signifiers takes place represents another connection with Raymond's method. A conspicuous trait of Manner's paintings, Northern and Italian, is the division of the canvas into different types of space, or what postmodern theorists like to call zones. In Cronach's and other Lutheran paintings can be found 3 such zones, each designated by its own particular treatment of space: the material secular world, the immaterial sacred world, and the hybrid world of church, where the sacred is simultaneously absent and present in what I've already referred to as iconoclash. As I said, painterly treatment in a more fully pictorial space allows the more complex qualities of these spaces and the relations between them to be treated more paradoxically than the black and white bluntness of the Ramus chart. But ironically, the most semantically and ontologically complicated space of all, that of church, is rendered in strict Renaissance perspective, using floor tiles to really rub this in. Okay, using the rectilinear forms of church architecture rendered in strict, using the rectilinear forms of church architecture emptied of images, church architecture which erases itself as church through the assertion of both its materiality and its emptiness, to create a sort of denatured, abstract, geometrical space also found in 16th century rhetoric textbooks. This rendering is ironic not only because it delimits the site of the encounter between the immaterial and the ineffable, but also because it gives structural coherence to the lineal representations of communications as essentially pointing and instructing while going on within that site. Discourse, action, definition, comparison, all are reduced to a sort of Shannon and Weaver simplicity, modeled on the figure of an authority who needs only to point for the message to be accepted and obeyed. That's why I love it when that whole beat, that stick was introduced. That was almost like the sentence we're talking about here. Okay? In one painting after another, the connection with clarity also to the last speaker. Himself is visually associated, in one painting after another, Luther himself is visually associated with John the Baptist as the archetypical authoritative pointer. There's recently a photograph of Donald Trump, sort of Leonardo-like smile on his face. I wonder what he was pointing at. Anyway, in a sense, having reduced theology to a model of methodically efficient communication, Lutheranism can be said to have contributed to the decay of dialogue. Even or especially where the residual animation of the act of pointing is not apparent in these paintings, space in general tends to take on the form of a diagram, wherein are found not representations, but various forms of indicator, like tables, glosses, and keys. Compositional regularities are tailored to conceptual relations, often making the use of spatial divisions to form visual symmetries to be read as categorical antitheses. Think of the before and after panels of old print ads, or the contrasting do and don't dramatizations in cheesy instructional videos. Even these dead diagrammatic dramatic features are not passive, on the other hand. Like multiple choice tests, they are engineered to drill the viewer in indicating the correct response, in replicating the authoritative act of pointing. This is the correct answer. Choose it in memory of those who will break it. This operationalization of religion took place under conditions of its being propagated as part of a mass movement, which made use of technologies that mass-produced both word and image. Like the pressures of mass pedagogy that Kahn describes as having been crucial to the appearance of Ramism, The style of Lutheran painting was shaped by the exigencies of preaching. As in the case of the printing press, mass production increased efficiency through standardization. Standardization not only simplifies, but its repeatability increases familiarity and thus both appeal and authority. This is true of the faces of rulers and other contemporary authorities that were strategically placed within the scenes depicting doctrine, right, and secular order. Furthermore, this sort of coining of personal images related to cartooning, obviously, through simplification and heavy outlining, served to set the figure off from its immediate context, abstracting and generalizing it into an authoritative value to be accepted by the community, a visual embodiment of that to which its finger points. Such amalgam of striking personality and social principle has been referred to as the routinization of charisma. In some ways, I think Trump's having a hard time getting routinized here. Furthermore, such isolation of the image can seem as if it were in quotation marks, a mere sign of a sign, not to refer to the world, but to be impressed upon the mind through rote and repetition. It is just such conditions of mass production through rote repetition in a closed system that Ahm describes as the cradle of Ramism. With these similarities between Ramist method and Lutheran painting, what these similarities between Ramist method and Lutheran painting have in common is a pervasive lack of depth. Behind the word images geometrically arranged on the printed page, Ramist omitted an entire dimension of meaning. Challenged by the task of visually representing three-dimensional space in the physical world, a task completed in the Baroque era, Mannerist painters often used flatness or conspicuous two-dimensionality to signal their alienation from the world, especially the emerging absolutist state. Lutheran painting can be said to represent religion in profile, showing the structure of its mechanisms of indication and injunction within the social order, while also marking no reference to the meanings behind them. Rather than the content of religion itself, the Reformation image presents us what Joseph Leo Kerner calls a sociology of religion. Not religion's meaning, but what religion looks like in the world. By showing religious practice as picture, it shows us a picture of practice. But unlike Ramism, the redemption of meaning here is not forgotten, but through other devices associated with the iconoclast deferred to the hereafter.
Questions?
Mike?
Well, okay. I kind of want to try to bring this, obviously, to all the panels. The issue of, if we consider Bruni and Joachim of Flores, and also if we're considering Cranach, there are moments of really calling into question establishment, and in calling what the norms of those establishments are. I'm thinking of Joachim, who really turns it into an anti-current church, and really turns it into this sort of millennialist sensibility with distinct end in mind and very, very specific ideas and goals. And I'm thinking also in terms of Luther, in terms of that type of declaration of an end of an order, though less precisely with a clear future behind it. I mean, Joachim has a real, and Bruni as well, he's got a real sense in terms of this is a new scientific age, I mean, hence the burning of the state, among others. And also when you start talking about technologies which are pulling us away from our humanity, all of these use a break in the norms of the medium, okay? And how self-referential, and I think in mannerism is the clearest example, how self-referential to the mechanics of the medium, the mechanics of language, the mechanics of technology, certainly to the mechanics of painting. How is that positioned within this sort of, okay, this is a transformative moment. Here are the mechanisms that have made the world that you see as normative. Now we're going to change those so they call attention to themselves. It's sort of self-referential to the mechanisms.
I have a very quick answer. Get it out of the way, then you can get more details. It was seen as a threat. It was repressed. I mean, just go to the Escorial outside of Madrid, and because you pay money, you go there. You know, it's like a pilgrimage to see this great. And most of the Manners painting is real dull. They had hired Goya. No, El Greco. Excuse me. They had hired El Greco, and he was too intellectual. They thought, well, you know, what's going on here? Maybe there's heresy going on here. We can't really tell because it's too individualistic, and he doesn't seem happy here. You know what I mean? Maybe he'd be happier somewhere else. And they basically they had him to be the custodian of all of the Manners, and they moved in decidedly not horrible but mediocre. I would suggest Sorry too much, but yeah. So, I mean, in some ways, the things that are calling attention to, there's a self-consciousness about it, would open up a critique, is also the means that if you read it on another level, is the basis of this flatness and clarity and this sort of transmission model. Just do what you're told, don't ask questions later, you know?
But I mean, the Chronic's paintings in many ways are more textual than they are pictorial. And that's what I mean of calling attention to the medium, that really you have approached these through a Renaissance naturalism, a Renaissance pictorialism, a painterliness and everything else. Stop that, it's like text now. In that sudden declaration. And it's the same type of thing as, you know, as you start to map out Fry, referential to Joachim of Flores, I'm thinking, okay, the schemata of, you know, I'm thinking Marjorie Reeves on Joachim. The schemata that he really is trying to reposition the past in a very clear sense of what the apocalyptic time will be, the time of the spirit will be. And it's a similar thing of when we talk the technologies that we're using, you know, how self-referential are they in terms of allowing us to declare that past, you know, open for criticism. And I guess that's sort of the gist of what I'm trying to find.
I don't know if I understand very well your question, but
It may not be a clear question.
yeah. But what currently do is to change the center of the study of the vision, because what he says is we always have seen the man has the center. It's an anthropocentric center. But what if we change the center now? And now the center is the world. So if we change the vision of the world, then man is changing. So now the man is not the center, but the world. So the 4 revolutions shows that how human vision is changing in accordance to the different visions from science about the origin of the universe.
What I was seeing in this, and you know, to contrast to certain people, like Adorno, who really was nobody's slave, there is this calling attention to images as images and words as words and things, but it's also saying that they're all roughly equivalent to each other at this very, very blank level. And then again, that the metaphysics, the whole thing that was dropped out of the rhetoric curriculum at this time, it just became ornament, it just became efficient communication, it never had an epistemic element to it, right? So that it was taking this out, you know, and there was a promise, and the question is it fulfilled? The promise is that we're talking about a meaning that's beyond, in which words and things and images are all melded to this wonderful kind of thing that the heart can depict, you know, but really after our death, It's really about the expectation of a kind of illumination, rather than the illumination itself. And that could be read as like a sort of a non-absolutist view of knowledge, but there's a flip to it, because obviously it was used to as much as, I don't want to say it was one or the other, but it was as much about indoctrination as these other modern elements that would seem to be the opposite. We're going to see this as a kind of radical complementarity, that their standardization and variation and all that stuff, working off these kind of image and figure and ground sort of things. So but that's what it seems like one of the things that you mentioned. Just because a question for you would be that you were talking about this almost as if there was a progress between the four revolutions, but you also seem to allude to a growing consciousness that these are not absolutes, they're not in the world, they're just gadgets, they're just ways of trying, and it also always calls attention to the mortality of our images. So I was just wondering, do you see a pattern or progress in the four revolutions? In any definite sense? Is it better? Is it progressive? Or?
Yes, of course it's better, but the point here is we are losing the human being. We are expecting to be more technological, more perfect in our actions, in our tools, but we are losing ourselves, our humanity. So I don't know if it's better or maybe it's worse.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but it is lunchtime, so
Oh, one more question.
but you guys can feel free to ask questions outside. I have to set up the room. Sorry.